idea for the Campus Change Academy sort of evolved in the Ashoka U team just a few days after last year's exchange. And we started putting things together, got a lot of input from advisors, and you're here today with 40 other institutions or so, and actually 34 presenters from Changemaker campuses. So it's going to be extremely fast-paced. We're already a little bit behind, and I hear some music.
Yeah, just some sauce.
Nice.
Michele, I just thought it was your voice.
Okay, good. Sing-songy. But it's going to be really fast-paced. We have almost 4 presenters in each session, but in some way that's really intentional, because from my conversations with a lot of you, this is such a unique opportunity to get exposure to a ton of different institutions, what they're doing, and there'll be about an hour at lunch to really dig in, ask more questions, and then the rest of the day today and the rest of the day tomorrow to really build that network. So I was feeling a little bit hectic this morning with all these logistics and it's so beautiful outside, and so I'm going to read a poem. And it was, you probably know it, and it's pretty familiar, you may or you may not like it, but I hope you'll indulge me. And it was just making me feel a lot better about my life today, and I hope it will be an encouragement to you to take advantage. Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. Be on the watch. There are ways out. There is a light somewhere. It may not be much light, but it beats the darkness. Be on the watch. The gods will offer you chances. Know them. Take them. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life. Sometimes. And the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you. So I'm going to welcome I have a few people to thank. Actually, I have tons of people to thank. I mean, 34 presenters, that's incredible. Tons of volunteers from USD, in particular Brittany Cotelis and Ashoka U staff member who you'll see later, who's really been helping out with this. And Susie Sosa and the Dell Social Innovation Challenge for sponsoring the Campus Change Academy. So I want to welcome up Susie now.
Hi, I don't have a poem. That's hard to follow at 8:30 in the morning. I just want to say hello to everybody. I'm Susie Sosa. I'm the Executive Director of the Dell Social Innovation Challenge. At least a third of you in here I know. In fact, how many of you already participate or have your students participate in the Dell Challenge? Well, awesome. So for the rest of you, I hope you'll get to know us a little bit better. We started out 7 years ago as a business plan competition, but in 2010 we transformed. And we focus now not so much on the grand prize winners, but actually on a mission of how can we activate as many students as possible from around the world. And so you'll see this year we're in the middle of the cycle. We had over 2,500 projects. In fact, there's even a few more that aren't counted on there. And this represents about 10,000 students from 100 countries. The really cool thing of why we want to share our platform with you is that it's no longer about a business plan. What the students do is they actually create a project page that's a living page. It stays up for as long as they want to keep it up all year round. And hopefully it can be an accompaniment to some of your courses. If you've got students working on projects or proposing ventures, this platform is a great vehicle for them to be working on it, not just your semester, but maybe on subsequent semesters or over the course of multiple years. The way that we track our success is how many projects advance and how many students actually get traction, talking to real customers, finding real partners, maybe even getting funding. And our commitment is to try to aggregate as many resources as possible to help these students. So this year, we have $350,000 of seed funding that'll go to 45 teams. Every single one of our semifinalist teams, it's about 260 teams, will get 4 hours of mentoring with a trained mentor. We're also now looking to offer things like internship opportunities, summer education opportunities, like the partnership we did with Alan Harlem at Brown, and more resources. So we are an open platform for any university, any student, undergrad or grad. It's our mission is to activate as many students as possible. So we would love to work with you to include the Dell Challenge and the platform in your courses or in other courses that you know about in your school. And along in partnership with Ashoka, we believe passionately in supporting campuses to create an ecosystem to help students, including the coursework, the funders, the mentors, and all the experiences and opportunities. So excited to be here with you, the kind of most active campuses in the country and also from around the world, and would love to partner with you in any way that you would like. So thanks for being here and for having me.
So my name is John Isham. I'm the faculty director of the Middlebury Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and I have a poem. There once were some gals from Ashoka. They met one morning over mocha latte. Soon their flag was unfurled. Let's change the world. Then they started to gather Ashoka. I think that's better than the one about the guy from Nantucket. So I want to start by thanking Marina and Aaron and Michele and Vita and Brittany. The list goes on, and if you reflect on that list, they all are women, let's face it. Those of us who've been doing this for a while know that this is kind of a women thing, what's going on in many ways. We talked about this at Babson a year or two ago. And seriously, I'm all for it. There's a lot of observers, big thinker types, who say this will be the century of women in terms of leadership. And I honestly think we're seeing the reason for that in the group we do. And there's a real sense of an important kind of leadership you were bringing. So thank you so much for that. How many of you have noticed that this is kind of the era of stories? Right? I mean, stories are everywhere. Put up your hand if you're a fan of StoryCorps on NPR. So did you hear the one the other day about the young woman who's in college? Her mom is somewhat disabled, and they were having a conversation, whether the mom embarrassed her. Did anybody hear that one? So just go listen to it. You'll start crying. Beautiful. But it is the age of stories. But of course, that's not new. In fact, it's probably the oldest medium we have, is Homo sapiens, stories around the fireplace. And thinking of the talk we heard last night, the first of the great two talks last night from Eric, he talked about having a story, learning from yourself in some ways, and then approaching people and saying, how are you doing? Remember that? And when they say fine, so like, really, how are you doing? But if you think about people sort of around the campfire, it's hard to imagine them saying, what's up? And then just sitting there, right? I mean, around the campfire 20,000 years ago, we had time to share stories. That's what we did, and it's in our DNA. And I think one of the reasons maybe we're gravitating to stories in this new century is their power. How many of you have either studied or worked with or know of the work of Marshall Gans, now at Harvard? So he has this approach to social change built around stories. It's called public narrative. It's one of the best classes and approaches at the Kennedy School now. And it's a very serious approach to the use of stories for social change. What Marshall asks one to do, if you're trained in his approach, is to develop your story of self and then apply it to the story of us, a group that you care about and you're part of, and then expand it out to the story of now. What challenge do we face collectively? So he uses as an example then State Senator Obama, 2004, giving the keynote for the John Kerry nomination in 2004 Democratic National Convention. If you haven't seen it lately, go back, Google it, and watch it. And Obama, in 12 minutes, tells his remarkable story. A woman from Kansas, a guy from Kenya coming together, how his story really is an extraordinary example of the American story, relates it to the story of people there, and then says, this is our challenge now to do better. So it's in that context that Michele asked me to share my own little story, which I've shared before in front of Ashoka folk. And you'll see it relates to our collective story. All of us together are thinking about social entrepreneurship and the future of education, and we believe in a certain model. So I'd like to share my story as to how I came to it, and I hope you see some common elements there with your own story. And then I'm going to pass the baton to my dear friend Gordon Bloom, who's going to help you, in a certain sense, lay the groundwork for a story that can be helpful to you from here on out. So my own story in terms of social entrepreneurship begins like this. It was December 2003, and I was at a seminar at Case Western University, their business school, and I was getting furious. There were 36 people there, and it was one of these academic conferences where there was a lot of this going on, you know. How many of you have ever been to a conference where there are professors who like to sort of talk about it, right? So actually, these were great people. It was a group of sustainability people who were thinking about the environment, and people who were thinking about social change. They really were great. And the idea was bring them together, create some magic, and think about maybe building a movement around sustainability. Well, I had just flown in from Vermont, and it was the height of the Howard Dean campaign then. So we all remember Howard Dean from his Scream, which came the next month, December of 2004. But irregardless of that unfortunate moment, Dean and his campaign, led by Joe Trippi, did something very, very exciting, and which the Obama team has benefited from ever since. They brought open source ideals to campaigns. So if you remember, it was the first use of blogs, of meetups. They had a decentralized, empowering approach. So many of us in Vermont and elsewhere who were getting all excited about Dean were doing so because it said we could be part of something bigger than ourselves. So it was with that attitude that I stood up halfway through this conference and I said, look, if any of this means anything, you know, thinking about social change and sustainability, we should do something about global warming. Let's do a march on Washington against global warming. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. These friggin' academics. So the next morning, I'm sort of steaming a bit, and I sit down with a few people, and we're talking about it. And I leave the conference, and I'm just sort of really stewing over this. I'm angry that the reaction I got, and wishing I could do something. Until one day, a student walks into my office, an advisee named John Hanley, bearded kind of Vermonter type, and he says, what are you going to do for your next course, your January 2005 winter term course? And I said, I don't know, John, what should I do? By the time he left, he and I made a vow to do a class called Building the New Climate Movement. At the time, the climate movement, not even with that name yet, was starting to come together. Young people, in particular on campuses, were saying, we do need to build a social movement around global warming and the challenge of climate change. So John liked that idea. I had a sabbatical to pull it together. And January 2005 came along, and that 4-week class occurred. It was a class that, even as I speak about it right now, gives me chills, because it was just one of those moments where everything came together. We had 20 students committed to this idea. They read 5 books in the space of 7 days. They wrote in their evaluations they've never worked harder. They worked with 5 NGOs and groups from around the country, in Middlebury, every scale in between, doing service learning work on how to build a movement. They dedicated themselves to that. And then we had a conference that brought in over 100 people from around the country to talk about building the new movement. We ended up on the front of the New York Times. And there was just this something in the air. There was this magical thing that was happening in that class. We were at the right moment at the right time. And the one thing I wanted to share with you was a moment when I was teaching class as we were getting ready for this conference. And we had just read about the civil rights movement, SNCC and SLIC and all the groups that got it going, led by women and men alike from mostly from the South. So I was up on the blackboard. I'm a lefty, so it was actually going like this. And, so I wrote up Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and as I'm writing it, I look out to the students and I say, guys, there's no reason that this couldn't happen now around climate. And there was this kind of like in the air. We realized that's true, isn't it? And 4 of those students went on to found with 3 other Middlebury students at the time, 350.org, which is now the biggest climate group in the world. What was my role in that? Not a whole lot. My role was necessary, right? I helped to get the students going, but by no means sufficient. They did it. So what I've learned about teaching, an open source approach to teaching, where you don't have much hierarchy, you empower students to lead through working through groups, through networks, and you persuade them that the knowledge they create now can be knowledge that matters and knowledge for the common good. So those elements of open source, I've learned that it's really just setting up students for the possibility, a world of infinite possibilities, as William James talks about, and then letting them go, and occasionally providing support. So that's been my own sort of pathway to social entrepreneurship, and I have just so benefited from working with Marina and Michele and the whole team, and I know that's true for all of us from Middlebury. This is a beloved kind of network, and so I'm so thankful to be part of it. We all have our stories, and so Michele, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share mine. One final thing, as I pass the baton, I'm going to say about this great Ashoka U community, is we're really good at stealing stuff, right? So if people have good ideas, you just steal them. So I went to this gathering at Babson a year ago. Cheryl Kaiser had these little cards that she was using to sort of spark conversations. So within about 3 days, we had our cards, albeit thanking Cheryl for her idea. So something I've stolen comes from my former classmate and dear friend Gordon Bloom at Harvard. And I was feeling a little guilty about doing it here this morning because I stole it from him, right? So last night, as we're all gathering, in walks Gordon. And I'm like, okay, now I really can't do this because he's here. So Gordon was gracious enough to come this morning and to do our final event together as we get started. Something I've used a lot, something Michele had asked me to do, and you'll see over the course of the next only 10 minutes what a powerful way this is to spark your own story. Gordon. Great.
So I was told that my role is to be brief, and I guess this is the icebreaker. So yeah, and that was about as much instruction as I got from John. Now, what I'd like to do is a quick exercise. The idea is to consider the question, what is important to you? Otherwise, what is important to you? And we're going to do it in groups of 3s. So I'd like you to, in a second, get into a group of 3. And I'll give you just a little bit of instruction, which is the boring part. The idea is a little bit of a Rogerian exercise. So one person is going to be the questioner. And they're going to ask the question again, like I'm working with Susie. What is important to you? And Susie's going to give me an answer. And I don't know what that will do, but she'll say something. And then I'll ask the question again, what is important to you? And that's it. And my job as the listener is simply to be accepting and understanding, not to sort of give comment, oh, that's cool. No, I think that's important to me too. So it's an active listening and a sort of empathetic listening piece. Then there's a third person. The third person in the group is going to sort of be recording, documenting, sort of taking notes. So all I need to do as a listener is to concentrate on appreciating that person and what it is that they're saying and the meaning of that. And as the speaker, you don't want to do something that's all like, what is important to you? Well, I was thinking about the marginal utility. So you just want to give an answer that's spontaneous, that's coming from your heart. The image is a little bit like if you've gone into a cafeteria and there's that dispenser that has all the plates. And you sort of take off the plate and another one sort of pops up. Another plate, another plate, another plate. What is important to you? This is the repeating question exercise. All right, so you need to be in a group of 3. You need to choose who's going to be A, the speaker, who's going to be B, the listener, who's going to be C, the person who's writing stuff down. And then we'll do our exercise. We'll do it for a very short amount of time because each person will be in the front.